Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Brenna Huckabee.
Three-time Paralympic gold medalist and someone who is completely obsessed with learning how to live a life worth fighting for. When I was 14, my whole life flipped upside down after a cancer diagnosis. It wasn't just about the health stuff. It completely changed how I saw life, how I moved through it, and how I saw myself. I lost a leg, but I also gained this totally new perspective on what matters. And honestly, that journey is still unfolding for me. I stopped podcasting for a while because I felt kind of off and disconnected. Like the version of me who used to host this show wasn't quite who I am anymore. Maybe it's because I'm turning 30 soon, or maybe it's just how life is. But it feels like I've gotten way more questions these days than answers. So this season, it's not about having it all figured out. It's just about being in it. Curiosity, the messiness, the learning, experimenting. It's all about being in the middle. And that's where all the real stuff happens anyway. So let's kick things off with something I've been thinking a lot about lately. And it is this concept of belonging. I posted a YouTube video recently where I was doing what I'd call a massive act of self-belonging. I shared about the different lenses I'm using to view the world, what I'm learning through my sport, some general life updates where I talk to you like a friend hanging out in my living room, and something I've been working through internally. In this video, I open up about how I've been navigating this sense of disconnection and this craving for community. And while I was reflecting on what I shared, I had this realization. Oh, I don't know if you can hear this beeping, but my daughter has a Tamagotchi that I'm babysitting, and it needs to be disciplined, which is just a wild concept. Okay, where were we? So I had this realization that we actually have the freedom to choose how we move through our emotions, right? It reminded me of that quote by Viktor Frankl. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response." And I love this quote. I love remembering this quote because every time I think of it, every time I hear it, it just hits me hard. And that is what sparked this episode. I wanted to understand, what is loneliness really? What does it mean to truly belong? And how does social media specifically play into all of this? Because in a time where we are more connected than ever, why do so many of us still feel so deeply alone? So without further ado, what is loneliness? Well, let's start here because I think a lot of us feel it even when we don't name it. Loneliness isn't just about being alone, because you could be in a crowded room or online with thousands of followers and still feel totally invisible. It's really about not feeling seen or valued. Social neuroscientist John Capoccio describes loneliness as the perceived gap between the connection you want to have and the connection you actually have. Like your body is basically going, hey, I am hungry for real connection, but no matter how much you try to feed it, nothing's really landing. I don't know about you, but that feeling, I have carried it with me for most of my life. This constant, lingering sense of being misunderstood has followed me like a freaking shadow. And honestly, it didn't even realize it, that was the root of my disconnection until maybe a year ago. But here's the thing, I don't think we have to be stuck in that spiral of misunderstanding. When we remember that people can only meet us as deeply as they've met themselves, suddenly it makes sense why miscommunication happens so often. It's not always personal, and the more I've worked on belonging to myself first, the less those moments of being understood cut so deep. This brings me to a big shift in how I view loneliness, something I owe to the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and he saw loneliness not as a problem, but as a necessary, as a place where transformation begins, because solitude, to him, is where we finally get to meet ourselves. He wrote, "The eternal reoccurrence of loneliness is the price we pay for authenticity." It's pretty heavy, right? But it's also empowering, because the more time I've spent sitting with myself intimately by journaling, reflecting, asking myself hard questions, meditating, all the things, the more I've come to know who I really am. Not just how I want to be seen, but who is really underneath all the noise. There have been so many times when I felt that panic of being misunderstood, and instead of spiraling like I may have in the past, I stop and I ask myself, okay, why is this hitting me so hard? And in those moments, they've led me to see parts of myself I didn't know needed attention. They were maybe old wounds, limiting beliefs I had questioned, stories I had been telling myself. And if I hadn't felt that loneliness or disconnection, I probably wouldn't have gotten there. I wouldn't have had the chance to deepen my self-understanding and build something that actually felt like real belonging. Okay, so now we're gonna add social media into the mix. This is a place where we are more connected than ever, but somehow so many of us feel so much more alone. And why is this? And I think it's because we are mistaking visibility for belonging. I've noticed, and maybe you felt this too, we might get lots of likes and follows and DMs, but they're often shallow. They feel like connection, but they're not really nourishing us. Also, we're constantly comparing ourselves to the people that we see online. Everyone's posting their wins and their highlights. And even if they're just sharing parts of their life that are funny, maybe there's just aspects of, whatever they're sharing that is comparing us to them. Maybe not in such a black and white wins versus not feeling like you're enough.
And honestly, something I've noticed within myself is I will see other people's content and they have so many comments, so many likes, and I perceive that as connection, not realizing that not everything is as it seems. That person may not be perceiving that as connection and community. The people commenting might not be. And so we're comparing from our own projection and perspective without giving thought to what it actually could be. So if we zoom into ourselves, we're feeling maybe not the most positive in this longing and desire, which I don't think is a bad thing. It shines light to what we want, but it can turn into a bad thing for our mental health if we're not aware of it. But when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it might not be how we are internalizing it.
Also, maybe we start editing who we are to fit in because the algorithm rewards sameness. So we're trading our authenticity for this approval. And maybe the hardest part is sometimes being visible means being vulnerable to judgment, to trolling, or in my case, which I feel constantly, especially if you're in a community, a marginalized community like being disabled or neurodivergent or just some aspect of difference. Then what is belonging? What is real belonging? It's when you're accepted, valued, and included as you are, not for what you do or how you look or how many followers you have. It's just you. Psych-wise, this is a big deal. Self-determination theory, which is a framework in psychology that fuels our motivation and well-being, says we all need 3 core things: autonomy, competence, and belonging. It's based on the idea that we're naturally wired to grow, learn, and connect. And when those 3 things are met, we thrive. When we feel like we belong, our nervous system can finally relax. We can stop bracing, we can stop performing, and we just get to breathe and be. And then we have Brené Brown, who's basically our own modern conversation on this. She says, belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. It's so simple and so powerful. But here's where I gently challenge it too. I actually think belonging does require some change, but not the kind we usually think of. It's not about changing to fit in, but it's changing through deep self-discovery. Because how can we be who we are if we've never taken the time to figure out who that actually is? That takes work. That takes patience. It takes slowing down, tuning in, peeling back the layers, and that's what the rest of this episode is about. Okay, so I have read many self-help books. I've read, I think, all of Brené Brown's books, and I still struggle with how do we actually belong to ourselves first. We know self-reflection matters, journaling, therapy, meditation, going on long walks where your brain gets to just relax. But then what? Let's bring in existentialism. Please don't judge me. That is a mouthful. In his essay, The Sickness Unto Death, he says, despair comes from being disconnected from your true self. So yeah, we know there's a cost to not knowing who we are, but how do we become that person? Kierkegaard believed the self isn't something you just find. It's something you become. And that becoming takes courage, especially in a world that's constantly nudging you to be more palatable, quieter, more polished, smaller, more beautiful, more consuming of things that will make your life quote unquote better and ultimately be more like everyone else. So when I say belonging starts with you, I mean it in the most existential way. Kierkegaardian way possible. We can't belong anywhere until we're willing to stand with ourselves, even in the awkward, uncertain, in progress phases of our becoming. It's one thing to understand your values, but it's another thing to live them. And that's where real vulnerability begins, because embodying who you truly are means you might be misunderstood, misinterpreted, disliked. And that sucks. But it's also where freedom is born. It takes compassion. Compassion for yourself because you're allowed to be messy and in progress. And in compassion for others because we can only assume and hope that they're doing their own becoming too. And this doesn't have to be some huge sweeping act. It can be tiny moments. Maybe you wear something you love, even if it's not quote unquote cool. Listen, I am somebody who loves a good thrift. The majority of my clothes that I wear day to day are thrifted. I mean, I don't thrift my athletic wear and I don't thrift things that I like to wear to events, though sometimes I will throw in a thrifted little piece that I found. But I do it because it's something that I love to do, even though it's not always the cutest and trendiest situation. I also, and maybe this is something you could do as well, post something honest, even if it flops. The last 10 weeks, I have been so intentional with posting what brings my soul alive, sharing parts of myself that maybe isn't the most trendy, maybe isn't the most, what do they call? Your hooks. I don't have the best hook or engagement bait or whatever, but it's me and it's honest and it is a radical act of self-belonging. And also, maybe your radical act in the tiny moments could be saying no to something that just simply does not align with you. These are all micro acts of self-belonging. And as we do this, because remember, we've already taken time to reflect what our values, we've gotten quiet with ourselves, but now when it comes to actually belonging to yourself, it's doing the actions. It's not performing, it's not curating, you're not validating yourself through your actions, you're living your truth, as they say, because action is what our lives are made of. It's how we show the world who we really are. But here's a subtle warning, especially for people in public spaces, or if you want to be in public spaces, or even if you just post on social media casually, whatever it is. It's so easy to trade meaning for metrics. There have been times in my life I have 100% done it. You've probably done it, and maybe not on social media, but maybe with friend groups or situations where maybe if I just tailor myself a little bit, I'll be more likable, because you knew that that change would perform, would give you the validation you're looking for, would make you feel accepted, even if it didn't feel totally honest. And that's performance. So this journey is a constant self-reflection journey as well, checking in with yourself. And here's another gentle reminder, you're allowed to change. You're allowed to have different views and values and desires and aesthetics. You're allowed to change. But when we share from our truth in even small, quiet ways, that's where depth comes from. That's that realness and that richness of life. And even if no one else validates it, you did by living it. So I don't know about you, but honestly, I would rather have a portfolio of quote unquote flops than a feed full of meaningless content. Because when you close the app and log off, the only person left in the room is you and how you showed up. And that's your real legacy. And that's self-validation in the purest form. And speaking of online spaces, we actually have a lot more control than we think. We get to control what we see, what and how we interact with, what energy we let into our lives. So not only if you post content or how you're showing up in your real life, also start curating your space, not for approval, but for your own alignment. You get to control how you consume content or people. Maybe that means muting people that make you feel small, unfollowing what doesn't inspire you or lift you up. Set time boundaries. Girl, you know I have. And prioritize real life connections. You wouldn't let just anyone barge into your home and criticize your vibe, so don't let them live rent-free in your feed. Pay attention to who you're following and what you're consuming and how it makes you feel. Curating your digital space isn't superficial, it's sacred, and it is an act of self-preservation. So let's take all of this to the next level. A French philosopher and sociologist wrote a book that inspired The Matrix. And in his book, he argued that we live in a world of simulations, symbols pretending to be real. And listen, if you haven't felt that in your real life, I know I have. I feel like social media, though, is like the deepest mirror of this because it's full of it. We have likes pretending to be love. We have comments pretending to be conversation. We have posts pretending to be connection. So how do we avoid getting lost in this? And this is how we start to ground ourselves in what's real. We start to use technology in a different way than just consuming videos from people that entertain us, or sometimes they do make us feel seen and make us feel good, but we must not let that feeling be misinterpreted as connection. And this is where it does get sticky because maybe you are connected to like a group of people that do feel that way. I don't know. I've been in situations where I've gotten into a comment section from something that made me feel seen, and it did develop this sense of community, but at the end of the day, it is superficial. It is fleeting. So I think that's where this kind of comes into play. We want to make sure that we're curating and grounding ourselves in what's real and sustainable and long lasting. And so maybe that's having a FaceTime call with somebody that you love, or writing a handwritten note, or a slow morning with your journaling, or a good book instead of starting the day with your feed. And we're going to take this to Bell Hooks. My goodness, she 10 out of 10. And she always brings it home. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at her quote where she says, belonging isn't about being seen, it's about being known. And I feel like the more not only we know ourselves, but the more we can know others and take time for others, that's where we have life-changing experiences. That's where our worlds become less exclusive and more inclusive, and we open up our hearts to deeper understanding and connection to others.
I found a philosopher who actually has so much in common with this principle, and it blew my mind. Her name is Simone Weil. She's a French mystic and philosopher who wrote deeply about attention. And one of her most famous quotes was, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." Okay, I have to go on a tangent about this for a second because Simone Weil has absolutely blown my mind. When I started this podcast, I was just trying to understand what it means to belong in a world shaped by social media. But that curiosity had pulled me down so many rabbit holes, mind you. But my favorite one was her work. I don't know if it's the fact that she actually lived out her philosophies, which I feel like is pretty rare, or if it's the fact that her ideas were just so deeply rooted in empathy. She didn't just like sit there and theorize and write about what she was thinking or finding, which she's an incredibly educated woman. She went to one of the top philosophy schools of the time, but she also lived out her thoughts. She put herself on the front lines quite literally. She volunteered in the Spanish Civil War, like actually went to war for her beliefs. She worked in factories so that she could better understand what was happening during the Industrial Revolution to the human condition. She went and actually did the work. And she came from a place of privilege. Like she didn't have to do any of this. She chose to because she wanted to understand suffering firsthand and also test her ideas out in the real world in this idea of attention and intention. And it hit me really hard. Also, because I'm someone who tries to live in alignment with my beliefs, even when they're messy and imperfect and contradictory. And I think that's what I really liked about her work because a lot of philosophers had dismissed her. And she didn't become widely known until after her death, partly because her writing is full of contradictions. But what I really loved about this is it's probably the most real and the most human that I have come across when it comes to philosophers and the great thinkers of our past because it just feels so human. And I see myself in that messiness, in the way that authenticity sometimes means holding conflicting truths about who I am, who I was, and who I'm becoming, and having to constantly say, like, oh, wait, that actually doesn't make sense for me. So I've been on this Veil rabbit hole, and I've got her books on my to be read, and I can almost guarantee this will not be the last time that I bring her up. But for today, let's stick with this attention. And for her, attention meant really giving ourselves to our life and to each other, because that's the greatest gift that we can give to the world. And we might find through being in the moment, being free to experience what is happening to us, we might find that that whole time we had belonged to ourselves and each other all along. We just never slowed down enough to feel it. Speaking of connection,
it also goes really well with Simone. It's this idea that presence is love, and presence is such a gift. I have been practicing this in my life, especially with my little ones, and it's so easy. Listen, I love my girls so much, but they know how to yap. I mean, so do I. If this isn't the, girl, if the shoe fits. I'm literally talking into a microphone right now. I know how to yap. But attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, because when's the last time that you sat and talked to someone without thinking about what you're going to say next? Or when have you sat and talked to someone without, a desire to help? Which I know helping is amazing, but sometimes people just want you to listen and to be there and to honor and hold their pain and to just be and to hear. It's hard. I'm not saying it's not hard, but if we can do this in our real lives, which I think is probably the most fulfilling, how can we transform this in how we consume social media and how we can change this concept of community and connection in a world of algorithms and external validation? And so I've been trying to practice this since I've had this thought concept come up, and I've stopped trying to judge what someone is saying in 3 seconds. I'm missing out in what content, and I hate saying content, but it's like in what stories and perspectives and life they have to offer. Because I truly believe each and every one of us has stories worth hearing, has life experiences worth sharing, has wisdom and growth worth getting to know. And so I've been really trying to give someone more than the average 3 seconds. I've been trying to pause and really, truly pause and give it our full attention. And this has changed everything, because honestly, it's dropped my screen time significantly, which I had already dropped pretty heavily a while ago working on a social media addiction. But now it's even less, because I don't know, I just feel, I don't want to say fulfilled, but enough. It's like, man, yeah, that was great. I can move on with my life. It's not like this constant stream of consuming, because when you pause, and it allows you to be more intentional, it breaks your brain away from that gambling, addictive feeling social media was curated to give, and it forces you to pause, to listen to how the content you're consuming is making you feel. And I've noticed as I've done that, I don't need more. I'm like, oh, we're good. I think I got what I was looking for when I came online. I'm gonna move on. And I would say when I don't practice this, it's so much easier for me to be sucked in. So imagine if we gave our full attention to social media and intentionally. Imagine if we treated comment sections and DMs like altars and that deserve time and love and compassion instead of battlegrounds. And that's generosity in action. And isn't that all what we're searching for? I think it's important to remember that not everyone on social media is posting for connection. There are people posting to create battlegrounds, to create pain. And that's why we have the mute and unfollow button and not interested. And if it made us feel really heated and uncomfortable, we pause and we turn it off and we write about it. I'm saying this for myself too, don't you worry. So all in all, I hope this gave some clarity. If you're anything like me though, I feel like this gave me more questions, but at least a roadmap to begin to answer them, because now I'm curious, this concept of belonging, and not just through the lens of social media, how does it appear in places with accessibility, in these subtle shifts, these subtle depictions of belonging? Where is this showing up? Where is it showing up online, through brands, through businesses? I have so many questions, and I think that's the beauty of life, and I'm so excited to dive in and answer those, but that's a conversation for a different day. So in closing, maybe the real question for us, if you post, isn't how do I get more likes, but maybe it's more, how can I be more me? How can I belong to myself more deeply? How can I have moments of radical self-belonging so that everything else in life flows from there? Thank you so much for being in this conversation with me. This podcast is a part of my journey to answer those questions out loud and to live them. And If anything resonates, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a DM, intentionally, baby. Share this episode, or better yet, just take 5 minutes to quietly reflect. I'm really glad you're here, and until next time, let's keep showing up and living this messy middle of life together. With love, Brenna. Bye!